Hello, thank you for joining us. This is the Miro Consulting webinar on 7 critical cloud migration mistakes to avoid. We're going to begin in just about 1 minute. We are going to give everyone a chance to log in. You know how it goes. Whenever you've got that big important meeting, Zoom or decides to update itself and you need to restart and all those other things, and your phones don't want to connect, and we've all been there. So we're going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll begin the presentation. All right, again, thank you for joining us. This is the Miro Consulting webinar on 7 critical cloud migration mistakes to avoid. We're going to talk about cloud migration strategy, migration approaches, the costs, and the hidden mistakes. My name is Sean Donahue. I am a software licensing expert here at Miro Consulting. And we're going to walk you through basically all the lessons learned that we sort of found when we were working with our clients over the last many years and helping them migrate to the cloud. Before we begin, I just want to let you know who we are so you know who you're getting this information from. We're a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon Web Services, and Salesforce. We specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and of course, cloud services. And essentially, we help our clients get the maximum ROI on their software license and subscription investments. We help them stay in compliance and essentially get the best deals on contracts, audit settlements, things like that. The best part about working with us here at Miro is we have a no risk performance guarantee that the amount of money we're going to save you on your on-premise cloud software, et cetera, we're going to save you is going to be more than our fees. So there's no risk in working with us if you would like our help with anything. So what we're going to go over is, like I said, the mistakes that we've seen clients make or almost make, we've seen people make before they got to us, we help them fix. And they generally fall into one of a handful of categories. And those are, they have lack of a clear cloud strategy, sort of kind of like why are they moving at all? What do they hope to accomplish? They choose the wrong migration approach, and we'll go over the different versions there are. They underestimate the costs. They don't realize there are hidden expenses involved. They ignore changes to the cost of support. This is a very much an overlooked one. How support changes when you move to the cloud and how that can cost you more money and more time, more importantly, than you ever expected. They will move to the cloud and they'll fail to align their contract terms and renewals with their business needs. A lot of organizations think that cloud is a one-size-fits-all, so they accept whatever terms the cloud provider gives them at the beginning, and they don't negotiate for the important terms and conditions they actually need to do their business. And often they don't find that out until it's too late. And they also have a problem with lack of internal cloud expertise and training. We see a lot of organizations, they want to move to the cloud and they don't have any cloud experts. They don't know what it's going to look like, and their internal staff isn't interested in learning. And finally, the poor change management and user adoption. Again, one of the things that happens with cloud migrations is obviously there's big rollouts for some types of systems, and they don't get adopted by the users, and that can create a lot of wasted expense. So let's talk about the lack of a clear cloud strategy. And that's very simple, is why are you moving? What is the reason to move to the cloud? And we ask that up to our clients because there's a lot of hype right now with the cloud, and people who have on-premise solutions or have different solutions in different places are getting, a lot of times if you're an IT leader, you might have your executives, when are we moving to the cloud? Why aren't we moving to the cloud? Why isn't this in the cloud? Well, sometimes it doesn't make sense to have things in the cloud. And moving there because it sounds trendy is a terrible idea. So you've got to ask yourself, why are you moving? Are you looking to save money? Are you looking to get better performance or types of performance you couldn't get before? Are you looking for a more secure backup? Are you trying out new things? Are you testing out new hardware configurations? And finally, one of the most important questions a lot of organizations fail to ask themselves is, if they move, can they move back? Sometimes cloud migration strategies involve the data getting changed or something happening with the old servers, where they're going to decommission old servers, they're going to move them out of the room they were in, stuff like that. So is there a backup plan if the whole cloud strategy doesn't work out? And that's pretty much one of the most common mistakes we see people make is they fail to assess which workloads are best suited for migration. And we're going to get into the details of that. So give you a perfect example. One of our clients is a large utility company. They've got a lot of industrial equipment on site. They're a water company. And they have a lot of information that was basically measured and stored locally. So think of it like testing the water to make sure it's clean. I'm not a water expert. You understand what I mean. So they were thinking about moving everything to the cloud. And while it sort of looked like at first their actual compute costs would be a little cheaper on the cloud, they did a big deep dive into what would this really cost, and we helped them with that. And what they found was that the actual cost of moving that amount, because there's very large amounts of data, as you can imagine, industrial data, being pushed around, it really didn't make any sense for it to be pushed out of the on-premise location and up into the cloud, because then it would just have to come right back down again. And they also found they would have to kind of keep a standby system of all the same stuff running on site in case they lost their internet connection. So at the end of the day, while this particular company, organization, I should call them not a company, this particular organization looked into it, and at first they looked like it was cheaper. Once they added up all the extra things that didn't come with an on-premise type of solution, they found that that cloud cost would actually be more money and it would actually be more risky. And at the end of the day, they decided to stay where they were. So that's one big question you might want to ask yourself is, am I pushing a lot of data around locally, or is it bouncing up around in the cloud anyway? Do I have a small data footprint? Do I have a very large one? Here's the exact opposite scenario. We had a client who was a wonderful high-class university and high-ranking university, excuse me. And they had a number of servers doing different functions you might think a university does, their email, their website, things like that, things running their, or, the class software. And they were hit by a hurricane. And when they were hit by a hurricane, it took out their main servers and it took up their backup servers, which were sitting right next to their main servers and got drowned in the same hurricane water that their main servers got killed with. So they found that one of the things that they were looking to move to the cloud was their backup servers so that it was physically offsite and hurricane proof. So that's a perfect example of a great thing to move to the cloud because it takes advantage of what that workload's primary feature was. And the primary feature of a backup server is not to get wrecked when it's sitting right next to the production server, because that defeats the whole point. So there's a good example of something to move to the cloud. So again, it's if you don't define your key performance and costs up front, you could have an expensive cloud migration that is actually much more cost than on-premise. And in addition to that, one of the things organizations miss a lot is they might need to purchase different or even new software licenses or subscriptions for additional features. And what we mean by that is their licenses may not be portable to the cloud, or they might be portable and they might need to buy twice as many. Certain things, for example, like Oracle, if you try to run Oracle on AWS, you effectively need double the licenses for the same amount of CPU. And then you got to think about, are some of these applications designed to run on the cloud? Some of them are performance limited in the cloud. They can't operate in the cloud like they would on an on-premise server. Another thing to think about is this move switching your cost from CapEx to OpEx? Now, I'm not a financial person, but you should talk to your financial people. If you're an IT executive, you should talk to your finance executives and say, hey, if we move this, is this change from CapEx to OpEx going to blow a hole in the way we run our budgets or the way we allocate money? Because that could be a big difference for them. And finally, one of the things that you have to worry about is the future increases price increases could be a lot less predictable. So when you buy an on-premise server, effectively, that's the cost. Cost is known. But what happens if your cloud provider doubles their price or makes their price 50% more? That could be a significant cost increase. And if you're locked in, you won't be able to do much about it. So you got to ask yourself, what kind of migration is best? And there are 3 kinds of migrations we're going to look at. So what those are infrastructure as a service. Now, this is strictly compute. This is essentially like bare bones AWS, for example, and you're going to build your own server. And a lot of people who look into lift and shift, this is what they're sort of thinking of, just having a virtual version of their on-premise servers. And different ones of these infrastructures are designed to run different software better. So for example, Oracle infrastructure as a service is actually runs best on the Oracle platform as opposed to anything else. Whereas stuff that is specifically like Microsoft software might run best on Azure. So one thing to consider. The platform as a service is more of, there's a lot of tools out there, for example, where you can build an application using their platform. Now that might be a better solution. So let's say you have a on-premise custom solution that you built in-house. Well, instead of moving that as is, it might make more sense to rebuild that solution in a modern cloud-based platform, and you might be able to get a whole bunch of new features. It might run better. You can retire your old custom code. So platform as a service may be the right move. And finally, there's software as a service. And the best solution example of this I like to give is Salesforce, where the platform's there, the infrastructure's there, and now you are just using the software that already is installed essentially, and you're just moving your data and your workflows and things like that into it. And maybe that's the best solution for you. So what we like to say is don't just assume that what's called a lift and shift. You're just going to lift your existing workloads and replicate it virtually. That may not bring cost savings. It may, but it also may not. It might not be the right solution for you. So let me give you another great example here. So we had a client who was looking at the cost, and they were trying to decide between AWS and Oracle's cloud, OCI. And they did exactly what I just mentioned. They wanted to do a lift and a shift to the OCI, basically just like I said, taking physical servers, turning them into virtual servers. And what we found a lot of times is that the cost, for example, here for this client, we found the cost would be about half to move to Oracle Cloud versus AWS, and that was because this client had Oracle licenses that they could move directly to the Oracle Cloud, and they would get a one-to-one migration for licensing. However, if they moved to the AWS cloud, it was going to require 2 licenses for the same amount of compute power. And that's because of one of the rules Oracle has around what are considered acceptable cloud. I forget the name of this, pardon me. The cloud platforms that Oracle charges a single license for, just like on-premise, versus the group they charge 2 licenses for. AWS is in the 2 license group, for example, whereas GCP, Google Cloud provider, you only need the 1. So in this case, the client came to us after the fact, after they had done this migration, and we found out that they had purchased well over deployed their licenses to make this work, and it would have worked a lot better had they moved back to OCI. So you might want to ask, instead of migrating your server or application, would it be better just to migrate the data and the functionality? So that's a great question to consider. You also should consider a phased or a hybrid approach. So instead of moving everything all at once, it may be good to only move some things. So one of the examples here is Salesforce, for example. You may not want to move your entire sales team from something else, either on-premise or like a different CRM, to Salesforce, when instead it might make more sense to move 25% of your sales team over, and then in 6 months move another 25%. And that will help you sort of take out more bite-sized pieces. It helps with your training teams, and they're able to train smaller groups, get that group running, move on to the next group, much easier than to train 20 people at a time, for example, than 500 people all at once. So we had another one. This was a really interesting example. So this is an example of a organization. They were a large retailer, and they had a very specific problem. And their problem is they couldn't start they couldn't start reconciling the day's sales until the final store was closed. And the final store was on the West Coast, so they couldn't start their processing until about midnight East Coast time, when their final stores out on the West Coast closed and reported their sales for the day. And this was just a real big pain for this organization because it delayed how fast they could get their numbers in. It delayed how fast they could adjust. If problems happened, they were happening, overnight. So they had an overnight IT team that had to deal with all this. And it really was something they were trying to resolve. And by moving to the cloud, they were essentially able to use different software that they weren't able to use on premise, which effectively had all the sales being reported live. So what they could do at the end of the day is they could pick and choose when they would just say, okay, for purposes of our decision making for tomorrow, this is we've got 95% of our sales of the day in. Let's just run it now. This enabled them to move much faster. All of a sudden, they were getting their process done the night before instead of early the next morning, which made a huge difference in terms of how quickly they could react to market trends. And they were very happy to be able to have this new functionality. But one of the things to be careful was they also said how they were so happy with this. They said, "Oh, let's move everything to the cloud," and that's where we sort of came in to help with that as well. And after analysis, it was like I mentioned earlier, a lot of their stuff, a lot of the things that revolved around their warehouses, there was no real reason to move that stuff to the cloud. It worked better on premise. They'd already invested in it. They weren't going to get that big windfall performance change, so it wasn't worth it at the end of the day. So I talked earlier about underestimating the total cost of ownership. And because cloud costs are usage based, they can get expensive very quickly. Because as we know, as my finance teams on the call will know, sometimes IT teams are a little bit more interested in cost, in performance, than they are costs. So these costs can add up quickly. So another one is the data usage fees, the data going in and out of the cloud. If you are pushing huge amounts of data from your on-site locations to the cloud and back again, that can get very expensive very quickly. And companies often assume they can reuse their existing licenses in the cloud, but not all vendors allow that. And some impose pretty stringent restrictions. Some don't let you at all. And some of them change the way the pricing model works versus, so for example, if right now you're paying based on named users and you're moving to the cloud, that might change it to a CPU cost, and there might be minimums, and there's all kinds of things that can change those costs. And a lot of times they may end up paying for software they don't use if they don't do it properly. Best example I can give you is VMware. VMware just changed to have something like they had 130 products down to 9. So if you're a VMware customer and you fail to, if that is your plan, you have on-premise VMware, you're going to keep that as you move to the cloud, you may end up having to purchase a whole bunch of extra stuff that you didn't want because now it comes as part of a package. And also, one of the big things also considers the cost of an audit. So as you start moving things around, and the big example we give people is they'll move a workload to the cloud and they'll be testing it, but they'll still have it on premise. So they're using that software in 2 places at once, and they're not allowed to do that. And big organizations like Microsoft, for example, like IBM, they will recognize that. They will see you double using it, and they will audit you, and it will cost you a whole lot of money if you don't plan this out correct. So we always, in other situations, is where we've seen organizations were completely out of compliance with their software licensing and subscription rules. And then instead of fixing that before they migrate to the cloud, they just take that broken out of compliance setup and they move it as is to the cloud. And then all of a sudden it messes up their whole migration because they find out halfway through they're migrating a completely non-compliant system and drawing attention to it. And like I said, vendors may impose hefty fines if you break their licensing rules when migrating. And like I said, one of the things you got to look at is do you have BYOL clauses in your contract? BYO stands for bring your own license. So certain things you might move to AWS. AWS will let you bring your existing on-premise license, but will say the vendor whose it is, like an Oracle and IBM, will they let you use it? You have to find out. So here's another great example of what I mean by, hidden expenses can add up, especially if you don't do them right. So a lot of us use AWS, and one of the low-hanging fruit for AWS cost savings is pre-purchasing credit. So instead of saying bill me as I go, essentially you purchase a credit for a certain type of server. So we had a client, very smart. They pre-purchased a whole bunch of credits on AWS for a specific type of server. And great, they were saving a lot of money. But then over time, as their IT team continued to tweak things, they eventually tweaked their servers, making it size differences, making it version differences, to the point where those servers didn't qualify for their AWS cost savings plan anymore. And what ended up happening was, as soon as their servers that didn't qualify were tried to charge against their credits, it was just refused, but they didn't catch that. So all of a sudden, they were paying double. They were paying once for the credits that nothing was using, and then they were also paying for their server because their server couldn't use their credits. They ended up paying double, and that's one of the things that is a hidden cost that a lot of organizations don't see. There's also problems with AWS. There's storage costs. There's dozens of different costs. Load balancers, things like that, and they get out of hand pretty quickly. It's very difficult. AWS does create some cost savings tools, but they're more like what we like to call cost savings theater. They're not really saving you costs. They're just kind of giving you the impression. The problem is the real way to save on costs is to analyze usage reports that frankly are not, you can't analyze them as a human. There's just too much data. It's too much code. You're not going to be able to do it. One of the things we do, for example, is we review AWS usage reports that are only machine readable with special tools we have. And we come back and say to the customers, okay, you can save on this, you can save on this. We give them a little report card of savings. Typically, it's very significant, hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. So if that's something that you are looking to do for your organization, bring down your AWS costs, we have a great thing. We can help you with that. Only takes about 5 minutes on your side to send us the reports. And then we can send you a report card back and say, here's all the places that you can save money. And again, some organizations, they don't even leverage their tools at all. So another big change that people don't even think about a lot of times is their changes in support. So the on-premise support you get may not be at all the same as the support you get in cloud. Specifically, a lot of cloud systems are like vending machines. There's no human to talk to. You think you might be talking to a human and you're just talking to an AI chat. So you've got to look at the cost of support when it comes to migrating to the cloud. It also might be, you may not be able to do the support. Sometimes your support, you might pay it every 90 days, but now you have to pay it every 30 when you move to the cloud, or there's a 90-day delay that your company doesn't pay anybody on a 30 days. They pay everybody, on the 90 days after their invoice. Some cloud systems will not accept that at all. So either you bend or your finance team bends their rules because you're not going to get the cloud provider to do it. And some of them, when you move to the cloud, you have to change all your support. You're basically signing away all the support that you used to get. And now you've got to buy more cloud-based support that could be a lot more money. And these cloud teams, they deal with a lot of tickets compared to the on-premise support teams that you might be used to. They could be off-site, they could be out of the country. And unlike traditional on-premise vendors, there's no real guarantee for in-depth troubleshooting for third-party software. So another client we had, we provide them with additional licensing information about some of the solutions they were analyzing. And they effectively found that when we looked at it, they were looking at support. We found they weren't even using some of the things that they were asking for support for. So it's just shelving that and not getting any support for some things that they weren't using was a great savings. We ended up saving that client $200K just by removing some things that they didn't realize they weren't using. We found when we did an analysis of their systems. And we also help with our clients get terms and conditions they may not realize they need. Perfect example of this we see all the time is clients who have language in their contracts that say you can't use these licenses in any other country. And we had a client who essentially they were purchased by the next door company. They were a French company purchased by a German company. So now that they had a German parent, the vendor came back and basically said, you need to buy all new licenses because you need to buy licenses that can be used in Germany. And we basically were able to help that client instead of purchasing all new licenses at the cost of millions of dollars. We were able to work something out with the vendor where they just purchased the right to use it in all those countries. And that's just one of the small examples of what we mean by terms and conditions. There's also other kinds of things that we know clients should have and could have because we've seen so many contracts with so many vendors. So we know the types of clauses you could use before you even realize you need them. Another one here is failing to align the contract terms and the renewals. A lot of times people just they're so focused on that initial contract and purchase, they kind of overlook the renewals, and they can a lot of times get screwed in the renewals. Anything from language that was in the original contract doesn't get included with the renewal. They didn't lock in any types of long-term pricing. They didn't lock down the costs of downgrading, using less of something. And they might have assumed that all of their existing on-premise licenses, clauses and terms apply to the cloud, and a lot of times they do not. And there are great opportunities in your renewal to negotiate for better prices, or at least not negotiate price increases. And it all depends on how mobile you are. It's one of the things I said earlier. If you migrate to a cloud vendor, are you locked into that vendor specifically? Could you move to a different cloud? Could you move back to on-premise? And a lot of these vendors, they bundle their services. And so they expect you to renew everything, whether you're using it or not. So that's one of the things you really got to look into the cost of renewals. And again, don't assume that everything's going to be the same as when you used to renew in the on-premise world. Uh, so we had a client, it's a large national medical group, and they wanted help with their ERP, their HCM, and their EPM cloud contract renewal. They were renegotiating existing Oracle cloud contract, which is especially difficult because you've done this once. The people over at the vendor, they've done it 100 times. Uh, One of the things that you want to specifically include in your contracts, if you can, is the reduction of costs. If you reduce things, if you reduce users, you reduce processors, your business, for whatever reason, you don't need as much of that particular workload, are they just going to tell you you've got to spend the same amount of money? So one perfect example we like to give with that is Salesforce. Salesforce will frequently tell you that you can cut your number of users in half, and oh, wouldn't you know it, your price per user just doubled, so you owe us the same amount of money. And that's how a lot of these vendors look at you. They look at you as how much you are good for every month, as opposed to charging you based on what they're actually providing you. So this client ended up with shelfware that was nearly impossible to drop. Basically, their HCM solution, what they weren't using at all, they just could not find a way to get rid of it. But we were able to essentially get them a renewal with no cost increase and a shorter term than they had than was originally requested. And this gave the organization enough breathing room where they could keep the lights on and plan out a migration away from the unused software. One of the big ones you might not be thinking about is your internal IT teams. If you're going to migrate to the cloud and your team is a bunch of people who specialize on premise, do they have the necessary skills to work to manage the workloads in the cloud? If not, are you planning on hiring people like that? Are they prepared to establish a governance framework? Or is that not something they could handle? So that's why we like to say that if you've got a team who's specifically just looking at functionality and they're narrow focused on functionality, they need to also plan around costs, and specifically the costs of licenses, features, and subscriptions. Because a lot of organizations, we find that's the last thing they look at. It should be the first thing they look at. So we had a large client who was looking to migrate. They were another retailer. They were looking to go to Microsoft Azure. And they were kind of choking on the costs. The migration costs alone are what was really getting to them. That was a lot of extra one-time expense. They wanted to be in the cloud. They just didn't want to spend the money to get there. And they all of a sudden, Microsoft gave them a great sweetheart deal and said, "Hey, we'll cut some costs for you here for your migration, and that'll cut down the cost a lot." And they were thrilled. They're, "Oh, this is great. This is going to eat up the cost of, this is going to take out the cost of the whole migration. So we don't have to pay for it. We just end up paying our cloud expenses when we get there. This is fantastic." And what they did not realize was that Microsoft was giving them a rebate that effectively made it so their calculations on what this was all going to cost on a monthly basis was completely wrong. They had assumed that these types of rebate was an ongoing thing. It was a one-time thing. So essentially, they ate the cost of the first few months of the usage of the cloud in certain ways, and that's how they shifted the dollars so the retailer could spend it on the migration. Then when they got there, they found out that, as they were doing this, they found out that, oh no, wait, this is going to cost them a lot more money than they had initially expected. And we were the ones involved, and we were the ones who helped them understand, no, this is just a one-time rebate thing. This is not going to be permanent. You're going to have much more significant expense going forward. That client effectively ended up moving to the cloud, but they had a much better idea what their usage would be under Azure than they had initially planned on. And then finally, just poor change management and user adoption. Mostly we find this is around not getting key stakeholders in the early in the migration process, getting them involved. Big example I can give you is this with Java. So we help a lot of organizations with Java licensing, Java subscriptions, all that kind of thing. Java's for cost now. If you haven't heard, I have a whole new webinar coming up on that next week, so I'll send you an invite for that. But anyway, Java is, Java costs money now, and a lot of organizations, they start with the IT team, and the IT team will look into their possible solutions. They'll end up saying, hey, we're going to move to this Java alternative that has sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. There's many Java alternatives out there. And then they get all the way down their migration plan. They're halfway to the finished ready to go with the migration, and all of a sudden their security team or their compliance team says, no, wait, we can't use this. It doesn't meet our security requirements. So we've seen a whole bunch of Java migrations get stopped dead in their tracks because the IT team was working on it without involving procurement, without involving legal, without involving compliance. And the solution the IT team was working on ended up not being acceptable to one of those other teams, and the whole project broke down. So with that, I will turn it over to some questions that we got during our process, some of the questions I ended up getting as part of this registration process. And if you have any questions, you can please feel free to put them in the chat. So one of the questions we've got, how do I explain to my boss why some workloads are not ideal to shifting to the cloud? And we covered that somewhat here. And that is, I have a feeling this person has something very specific in mind. The licensing costs, the internet and data costs, the hardware depreciation costs. So what I mean by that is, did you just invest in a whole bunch of servers and you were planning on getting usage out of them for the next 5 years, and now you're not? Your procurement team might not like that, your finance team. And the cost of putting it all together, the whole cost of migrating itself, instead of just comparing, the cost of what's it going to cost on premise, what's it going to cost in the cloud, also include the cost of moving it. Next question I got was, what's the best workloads to move to the cloud? Backup and test. We're pretty convinced that things like backup, getting it off-site for security reasons, and testing different pieces of hardware. You don't want to purchase a server and then to see if it works for you. Much better to try it in the cloud and try different variations of things and see if they work, and just spin it up, and if it doesn't, spin it down. So backup and test is the best things we think to move. Next question I got here was, we are I think he says media organization. We have a server room in our office. Should we consider moving it to the cloud? Maybe. It depends, honestly. The things that might help you in your specific situation, because you're a media organization, is page view speeds. So those of you who don't know, Google will rank you higher in search engine results based on a lot of factors. One of them is how fast your page loads. So you might get faster page load speeds by distributing your servers around the country or the world, wherever your users come from. And that page load speed might make it better in terms of make it worth it for you, but it's definitely going to be more expensive. The question is how much. So yes, Mr. Media Person, maybe it's a better idea, but maybe not. I would do a test to see what kind of page load speed increase you think you can get. And I think I have time for one more question. If you didn't submit your questions now, please do so. I work for a large manufacturer. Our service team is cloud-based, and management is considering moving our production servers to the cloud. Anything we should be worried about? Yeah, don't let other departments drag you into the cloud is the best way to put it. A lot of times, teams like sales, teams like finance, they'll be early adopters of cloud systems because it works better for them. They don't have a lot of data they're pushing around. So we've seen that before, where a service team specifically will start using cloud-based software, and they will pressure a sales team, or they will pressure a production team to also join them so that they can connect their systems better. And it's one of those, it kind of depends on your use cases. But don't just assume that, my other departments are moving, therefore I do too. Take a good look at what your department's doing and see if the cost increase, because it's always more expensive to move to the cloud, is going to make it worth it to have better integrations with your other teams. And I think that was my last question. Let me see. Yeah, that was my last one. All right, so that is everything. Thank you very much for participating. in the webinar today. If you'd like to hear more about any of this, you can reach out to us. We are Miro Consulting. You can email us at info@miroconsulting.com, and you could call us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208. And if you want to share this presentation with any of your colleagues, we will be putting it online. We'll send you a link to the recording. Thank you very much. And this ends the presentation. Have a great day.